Now, we have a very special guest today. Our keynote speaker is Joe Xavier. If you're not speaking again, please mute your microphone. Joe is the current director of Department of Rehab. Joe has over 38 years of experience in business and public administration, as well as many years participating in advocacy and community organization, and a beneficiary of DOOR services. Joe has the experience and understands the challenges and opportunities available to the individual with disabilities and services required to maximize an individual's full potential. Joe believes in the talent and potential of individual. Please mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Thank you. An individual's full potential, ensuring decisions and actions are informed by interested individuals and groups pursuing excellence through continuous improvement and preserving public trust through compassionate and responsible provision of services. Now, on a personal note, I was deeply moved to hear of Joe's recent announcement of his retirement from public service. I will always cherish his numerous inspirational presentation and SDAC. Throughout his career, Joe's been an exceptional speaker and unwavering advocate for the disability community. His presentations have consistently resonated with our audience, touching hearts and minds alike. His presence has been particularly meaningful as he concludes his distinguished career of service. So without further ado, Joe, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Bobby. Let's make sure you guys can hear me okay first.
Yes, we can.
All right, very good. So let me start with just good morning to everyone. Good to be here with you. Good to see all of you. Thank you to each of you for making the time to be here, to be part of the conversation. The opportunity for us to share and learn from each other is something I always treasure and will always call out. Council, the SDAC, thank you for continuing to create the place and the space where we can have these conversations and we can engage in the dialogue that is necessary to move forward our collective efforts. We also have the holidays before us. However you celebrate the holidays, may it be safe, may it be restful, and may you make time for your family and your friends and just generally rejuvenate throughout the holiday season. As Bobby mentioned, I am going to be retiring at the end of the year. It has been an absolute honor and privilege to have partnered with the council over the many years in my civil service role. And as I retire, it also provided me with an opportunity for a look back and a look forward. And so I want to just today share a little bit about both of my look back and my look forward. But let me start with just talking a little bit about systems change and systems transformation. And I start with that because it is essentially at the heart of our collective work to get more individuals with disabilities hired, right? And so what I want to do is just take a minute and share some of the key strategies that I have relied on as I've navigated both systems change and systems transformation. First, strategy is no good unless you end up somewhere different. This is a question that I'm routinely asking myself. Is the strategy that we're applying, the strategy that we're employing, going to result in us ending up in a different place or just end up where we already are, right? Welcoming change does not mean you get to keep doing the same thing. So have I been willing, am I willing to change, to end up in a different place? Change is not an event. Change is a process, right? And too many times we look at change as we're flipping a light switch. That kind of change is not the change that brings about the true systems reform, the true transformation. And iterative progress is much better than delayed perfection. And I have to remind myself of that over and over again, because things never happen as fast as I want them to. And yet, if I do a look back in increments of, whether it's 5 or 10 years or plus, you'll say, yeah, we made some progress, right? So I have to temper my impatience of not making progress with the progress that we have actually made. And then ultimately, this comes down to essentially, am I doing what I'm asking of others, right? Am I willing to change? Am I willing to adopt a strategy that takes me to a different place? All right. So with that, let me talk a little bit about two things. One is, and by the way, one of the things that I would say is, I should have said this a little bit earlier. Bobby asked me if I'd be willing to take some questions. I'm always open to questions. So any questions are fair game. If I can't answer that question, hopefully I can tell you why I can't answer it. But let me talk about a couple of different things. So the first one I want to talk about is, where are we and what have we experienced? So a little bit of like, what's the road we've traveled? What's the landscape that we're in? So first, we collectively have navigated COVID-19 unprecedented and once in a lifetime, I hope, experience. We've ushered in the hybrid workforce, and which I think is invaluable, and which I truly believe will continue to evolve. What we have today is very different than 3 years ago. What we will have in 3 years will look very different than what we have today. We are in the midst of a technological transformation, which holds great promise for individuals with disabilities. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And then, of course, there's a number of things at the federal level that have an implication on the employment of people with disabilities. And so I just want to touch base on a couple of that more than anything for you to be aware of, and particularly for you to be aware of as we move into this next 2, 3, 4 years, and what you should be accounting for in your recommendations in your respective roles. So first, we have the reauthorization of the Rehab Act that is very close to being done. It does not include Title IV, which is the vocational rehabilitation title, but there are some things in there that will have implication to Title IV, so keep an eye out for that as that gets finalized in the coming months. We obviously are all aware that we have a change in the federal administration, and we know that the prior iteration administration has not always been supportive of individuals with disabilities, and so it's reasonable to conclude that we'll see more of that in the coming years. And we certainly know that one of the things that is being talked about is the elimination of the Department of Education. What that can mean for vocational rehabilitation, for employment of people with disabilities, is something that we should all be paying attention to. And history, of course, suggests that we'll see an onslaught of executive orders and rulemaking, and all of that will have implications on employment for people with disabilities. And then at the state level, we have an incoming new crop of legislators. There'll be some 30 legislators, all of which will require being educated on the work that we do individually, collectively, the continue moving forward of employment of people with disabilities within the state of California. So there'll be lots of opportunity to educate this new incoming group of legislators on that front, right? And it's important to remember that that education that I'm referring to does not occur just at the state level. It obviously occurs at the local level. So where there's an opportunity to have local engagement on that front, just encourage vigilance on that front. Let me talk a little bit about the state as an employer, which is always a forefront of our interest and concern. First, I have always contended that we should do both. Celebrate the progress made, and yes, progress has been made, not as much as we like, but certainly has, and call ourselves to a brighter future. Both can be true, and both should be done at the same time. Doing one does not negate the other, in my opinion. We have continued leadership from the highest levels of the administration on the front, and I'll talk about some of that here in a second. But part of that continual leadership has resulted in a number of engagements with the highest levels of agencies. Just yesterday, I had an opportunity to engage with the leadership of GovOps agency. And earlier this month, I was invited by the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency to have a very focused conversation with all of his leadership on employment of individuals with disabilities. And all of these engagements continue to build that executive support for the hiring of individuals with disabilities across all of the agencies and across all of the departments. Of course, we should celebrate the enactment of AB 313 and 1195 and the organizations that supported that, including, of course, SDAC and so many others. We also now have CalHR as part of the Master Plan on Career Education, has removed credentials when they are a barrier to individuals with disabilities and others getting into certain classifications. If you're tracking this issue, the governor just released a press release and a framework for the Master Plan on Career Education. Part of that includes doubling the elimination of credentials that have already been eliminated. So all of those are things that bode well for continued efforts to hire people with disabilities. At our department, we have continued to produce and make available a series of tools, resources, training, technical assistance to all of our state hiring managers so they can do more of hiring of people with disabilities. Of course, we have lots of transition of leadership taking place. At our Health and Human Services, we have new Secretary Kim Johnson, Undersecretary Corinne Buchanan. We have a number of directors that are transitioning. We have a new director at the Department of Developmental Services. Obviously, you know of my transition. Department of Social Services has a new director. And there are others that you will be hearing about in the coming days, in the coming weeks. So as part of that, particularly with our department, I just want to take a quick second and talk about the director appointment process. First, it's an exempt position that requires Senate confirmation. And SDAC and the respective organizations will have an opportunity to support that appointment when it goes through that confirmation process. So just encourage you to keep an eye out for that and look for that opportunity to do so. So as I look forward, and one of the inherent dangers of the role that I've had for this many years is looking forward and seeing what is coming, right? What should we be thinking about? And just before we opened up the conversation here, Scott was talking about how it took a while for him to stop sort of thinking about that in that way. I suspect I'll be equally that way. I just am always looking down that road and say, what's coming? So let me just take a minute and walk through a few things that I see coming, and I think it's particularly important for all of you to be thinking about over the coming months and years. So first, our department must continue to be that model for the rest of the state in the employment of people with disabilities. And not just in our workforce, but in the people that come to us for services. And so I can really see where we will get to the point where 82% of the individuals that come to DOR for employment services exit with a job. Attention and intention will focus our efforts on that front. And our efforts will accelerate the many initiatives that we have underway. And acceleration will lead to additional creative opportunities and innovative opportunities to have a greater impact for individuals. Let me talk briefly about universal design. Universal design to me is where systems are designed from the outset so that whatever the supports an individual needs to engage that system is available for everyone, anytime, any place. And when we start building systems with that in mind, it really negates that need for, quote, the accommodation, because it's being built that way. And I'll tell you an example that I use quite often is both our physical environment in terms of buildings, and then on the digital front, the iPhone, the ability to go into the settings, and as under accessibility, and if I'm blind, I have what I need there. If I'm deaf, I have what I need there, cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities. That's the kind of mindset that we need to apply to all systems in all spheres so that universal design is truly being thought of. And we will know that we've succeeded when we have truly worked ourselves out of a job, because all individuals with disabilities seeking employment have secured a family-sustaining wage. They're living in their community of choice with purpose and dignity, and when true equity has absolutely been realized for everyone. We have artificial intelligence that is upon us. And the ability or the impact that AI will have on reasonable accommodations, to me, is going to be monumental. It's going to provide opportunities. It's going to provide supports in the workplace that we had not even began to contemplate, let alone understand. It will become a workforce multiplier to enhance the impact of what we're doing. And when I talk about workforce multiplier here at the Department of Rehabilitation, I'm not talking about the elimination of people. I'm talking about freeing up people to go perform those functions that we need them to perform to have a greater impact, and let technology take care of some of the other things. And then, of course, I see artificial intelligence being a key tool to help individuals with disabilities be prepared for that job opportunity. And I see it as a key tool if the individual with disability does not know how to use it. Will they be competitive in the workplace? And I often say that back when computers were introduced, there was a great fear that computers would replace people. What we've learned is computers did not replace people, but people who use computers have replaced people who do not use computers. And I see that absolutely being the case here as well. So a little bit about the state as an employer, a little more direct there. Obviously, continue the escalation with business. And for us, when we talk about business, it's every hire manager. How do we continue engaging every hire manager in the state, local government, municipalities, federal government, corporate small businesses, to continue to make the hire of individuals with disabilities? I look down that road and I see a point in time where the state of California collectively across all its workforce has exceeded the parity rate of 16.6% and gone far beyond that. Again, it's attention, it's intention that focuses efforts. It's efforts that will accelerate what we have underway. And it's that acceleration which will lead to more innovative, more creative practices. So finally, as I wrap this up, partnerships are invaluable. I encourage you to continue to engage with the Department of Rehabilitation, to engage other departments, and let us know how can we be better partners on this work. Opportunities. There are always opportunities. I've outlined some of the challenges that are coming. in those challenges, there will be opportunities to be identified. There will be opportunities to be leveraged. And so how do we start identifying, not just like what are the things that are going wrong, but what are the things that can create opportunities for us to do this? And just as an example, what do I mean by that? Before COVID, tragic loss of life, tragic in all of its illnesses. But before COVID, hybrid work was not really on the radar. And look at where we are today. This presentation before COVID would have been in person to a much smaller audience. And look what we're doing today. So yes, when these disruptions come, they can look very unfavorable to us. What are those opportunities? How do we leverage them? And then new faces, new ideas will step and have stepped into these leadership roles, and they'll continue to iterate on the progress that we've made and bring in fresh perspective and bring in fresh ideas. It has been an absolute honor and privilege to have collaborated with you on this journey. I remain deeply committed to the employment of people with disabilities, and I look forward to continue to be that champion, although it will be from the sidelines. So I will stop my comments there, Bobby. I'll send this back to you. More than happy to take any questions, time permitting, and there being any questions to be had.
Thank you, Joe. That was once again very insightful presentation. One question that came in the chat: as AI relies on randomized logarithms to generate prediction of qualified hires, how does DOOR or any relevant agency vet those predictions to encourage qualified hires with disabilities? And the speaker, the writer added, congratulations on your retirement.
Well, so thank you for the question, and thank you for the congratulations, right? When I talk about artificial intelligence, I think we have to really think about what does that mean, right? And for me, artificial intelligence is a tool to be leveraged. It's a tool to be used. It's a tool that I am using in ways I just never dreamed of before, and it's very, very impactful. I do not see artificial intelligence today, excuse me, as a supplanting of the human decision. It's to help inform and advance that decision making. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would call out here is there's really sort of two ways to look at artificial intelligence, and more will evolve, obviously, over time. One is, of course, the way that I've described it, which sort of how do you make more effective the everyday work that we're doing? How do we make more effective the everyday systems that we have in place, et cetera, et cetera? And so that's one piece. Yes, there will be the need, and there will be the use for technology and this artificial intelligence to create some truly transformative work. We're not there yet. And so to the extent that we already know that biases exist in the use of this for that transformative work, even as a tool, then it's a matter of us educating ourselves, and it's a matter of us being sure that we are aware of that bias and that we're accounting for it in the work that we're doing. So how do you do that, right? How do you become aware? Well, here at our department, we've been engaging our senior leaders so that they can start using this technology, number one, and number two, so that they become more skilled in what it is and what it's not, so they can be in a better place to support its use in the workforce and in the service delivery that we're talking about. So the solution to me is not bury our heads in the sand and stay away from it because it doesn't do X. The solution to me is get to that table so that we can inform and influence and ensure that it does do X. that it does look at disability in the right context with the right mindset, right? And we have that opportunity, and I just encourage us to lean forward and be part of that. And yes, I recognize there could be some scary pieces to this, right? There could be misuse of it, but that's true of every tool that we've ever developed throughout our history. So.
Thank you, Joe. Michelle, you have your hands raised. Please unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. You've been such an inspiration to everybody. We really congratulate you from the bottom of our hearts on your retirement. During your speech, you mentioned about as we build new systems and the need to create systems that automatically have accessibility embedded in them, so there's not a need for reasonable accommodation and moving in that direction. Has there been some discussion with CDT on requiring that as part of the review process or the development of these systems as departments create new ones moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, those are ongoing conversations that we have, not just with CDT, but even like in our own department's engagements, right? So, for example, here at this department, if we're embarking in the use of a particular technology, we're saying, hey, are you really, available and accessible and usable to everybody? If not, let's be talking about that. So yes is the answer. But again, I think it'd be fair to say we still have systems that are not accessible. But yes, we do. We have systems that are not accessible. Some of these are very, very legacy systems that didn't contemplate some of this. So again, iterative progress, right? Iterative progress. How do we keep moving it forward? And then when we're sitting at a table coming up with a new idea and a new framework, I always look and say, who's the person at that table that can reasonably represent the interests and the needs of the disability community more broadly? And are they sitting there and are they doing so?
Thank you.
Okay. If you have any questions, please either raise your hand or unmute and ask question to Joe. He's here. It's a great opportunity to respond to the inquiries. I do have one follow-up question about AI, Joe. I really like the analogy that you used by saying that people who did not use computer replaced people who used computers when computers were introduced. Same analogy could be applied. I'm sure you brought that up within the context of AI.
Yes.
What specific training, guidance, or even use case are being used in the state entities to identify the need for AI and making the equal platform for a person with disabilities to operate equally in all fronts?
So I'll speak from that at sort of two different levels, right? Let me start with at the sort of more macro level. A few years ago, the governor issued an executive order to guide the state's adoption and implementation of how we would use AI. And part of that is really looking at what will that mean to the vulnerable populations? How do we ensure that everybody is accounted for and built into that? So that was already called out in that executive order, and a lot of work is being done on that front. We sit at a number of different tables where we have been shaping and informing those types of guidelines to make sure that it accounts for disability. So that's, sort of that macro level. If I bring it down a little bit, I talk about our department. So here in our department, as I already mentioned, we have leaned into this, recognizing what it means for the individuals with disabilities, both who are in the workforce and those that want to get into the workforce. And so we already recognize where that opportunity lives. And then now we have embarked on educating leadership. We have use cases underway. So this occurs at multiple levels, right? And I think it's also important to recognize how much of it is already being used, right? How much of it is already out there? I mean, if you're using a smart speaker, you got AI at play, right? If you're using certain assistive technologies, such as myself, I'm using a screen reader called JAWS. AI is built into it every which way, and it's just expanding possibilities all the time. So increasingly, it's being built in. And so now it's, how do we apply it?
Thank you, Joe. Elizabeth, you have your hands up. Go ahead, unmute, ask your question.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Ingram, representing the Civil Rights Department. Fascinating information so far. Thank you, Joe. I have a question. It's more at the micro level here, but do you have any suggestions for equipment? And would you have any best practices for developing an equipment inventory? Thank you.
Can you tell me a little more when you say equipment? Equipment for what purpose?
Apparently, our department is working on creating a system for understanding what type of information is required by individuals and future employees. And we're trying to figure out what that would look like and how it would be implemented and the type of inventory we should put in place.
Okay. So I'm going to speak to this from sort of a couple of different lands. I think I hear inherent in your question that this is for the purposes of reasonable accommodations. And so when we talk about I'm sorry, say again?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk about reasonable accommodations, there's an inherent tension that we always need to be thinking about. And that is the tension that occurs between individualizing to the person and then having, quote, the inventory ready at hand, right? And those are just inherent tensions. And I hope they never go away, right? Because if they go away, that means we went off one way or the other. It's essential that we individualize an accommodation to the person. Two blind people do not use the same technology in the same way, right? So always starting with individualized to that person and what they need first is key. Then the flip side of that is once you've identified what a piece of equipment that individual needs, then how quickly can you make it available and get it into their hands? But this goes back a little bit to the universal design, right? And I'll just use the iPhone again as an example. It was designed in such a way that when I buy an iPhone and I'm blind, it's already built in what I need. I just go in and I turn on those features. Same for a range of other disabilities, right? So I think it's important that as, quote, equipment more broadly is designed, it takes that mindset, which then mitigates that need for, quote, the stockpile. Every single one of you who are here on in this forum today, if you have an iPhone and you go into settings and you go down to accessibility, you will see what it is that I'm talking about that's available there, right? So the best solution to equipment availability is equipment that's used by everyone and has all those supports already built in it. Yes, that's a little bit of an ideal compared to where we are. But if we don't talk about it, we don't think about it, we're not going to get there. Now, let me be more specific to your question. What might be some suggestions for you guys to be thinking about? I'm sorry, let me slow my head down so my mouth can catch up. Probably a little bit too much detail for the time frame we have today. I would encourage you to reach back to our department and request some consultation on that front, both from the digital aspect of this and from the accommodations aspect of this. I think we can sit down with you and help guide what some of that could look like.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that question.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other question for Joe? If so, please raise your hand or simply unmute and ask your question. And And I think somebody wrote, yeah, Elizabeth, reach out to Rosa Gomez at DOR or Disability Access Services at DOR. So that's another helpful pointer we can offer you. I do have a follow-up, Joe. You've been with DOR for a long time. You led that organization, and I saw how it developed and grown. What is your one thing that you can point to and you say, that's the best thing that I've done for DOR for all these years? And I know that you have accomplished quite a bit, but just one thing that you're most proud of.
Well, so my head goes 100 miles an hour because there's lots and lots of things that I would point to. I think the thing that I'm going to point to is our leadership. And I'm going to point to our leadership because we have, at all layers of our leadership, at the executive level, senior managerial levels, we have a very diverse range of members on our team. And when I talk about diverse, I'm not just talking about like one element of diversity. I'm talking about a disability. We have 40%, 60% of our executive team are people with disabilities, lived experience. They're not all the same disability. You can talk, we have race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomics, immigration. So I am really proud of the fact that the team that we have so represents the communities that we serve and the California that we live in, and everything that happens in this organization is because of them. So I leave with a great deal of confidence in this team continuing to move this organization forward. No reservations about it whatsoever, right? That's a really, really good feeling to have, because what this department does is not just professional for me, it's personal. It's personal. For those of you who don't know, I benefited from the services of this department when I was a teenager in high school and as a young adult. And I have extended family members that need the service of this department. So this is very personal to me. And I'm very, very confident in the leadership in this department to continue to do the great work and better. I mean, I've been very vocal. Don't you dare protect and preserve what we've done. You better make it better.
Excellent. Thank you. So your best achievement is diversity, is what I'm hearing you say. Inclusiveness and diversity, correct?
Yeah, in all dimensions, and just putting the right people in the right place and people that really care about what we're doing.
Great. Thank you, Joe. We have another person. Karen, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to Joe.
Hi, Director Xavier. Congratulations on your retirement, first of all, well deserved. I just had a question. As a former DAC chair, sometimes it's hard to get your DAC going, or to get your DAC going in the right direction, or to know what to do. So if you were able to ensure that all the DACs were going to accomplish something this year, what would that be?
So I think I don't want to oversimplify, because when we talk about the state as an employer, you were talking about 250,000 employees with across 150 plus departments, not to mention all the boards and committees and all that. And so this idea that we're all similarly situated, I think, is not a good notion to work with. Now, having said that, there's some basic principles that I think is important to process when when thinking about your question. In my opinion, one of the most beneficial ways to get a DAC moving and moving in the direction that everybody is supporting, is to start with developing the principles that will guide that DAC, not developing how you will do something, but what you will do and why you will do it. And I will tell you that that is much easier said than done, because what most people want to do is go to the law and say, the law says this. That's just the beginning. In your organization, given the work you are doing, given the culture that is there, what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 principles that should guide the DAC? And those should never be developed in a vacuum. And I say 3, 4, 5, 6, because sometimes when you take these exercises on, people take that and convert it to a manual. It's not a manual, right? This is not how you do something. This is what we are doing and why. If you can use those principles to make a decision, it's a matrix. That's not what I'm talking about. It's what you will use to guide your thinking in making decisions. It's what you will use to guide your thinking in making recommendations. Okay? It is not the decision tree. Those are hard to do, folks. As somebody who's done them a number of different times, they're very hard to do. I'll give you a quick example of not a sort of illustration of when I talk about how hard they are. A colleague of mine that retired, is now retired many years ago, left our department and went to work for another organization, another state department. We had this very conversation, like how should she approach her role? And I said, well, the first thing I think you should do is you should develop these, these principles that will guide you as a leader in the organization. And so she says, and we talked about this and, a little bit more. And so we got together, I don't know, like a few days later. She goes, I got them. I've done them. I said, no, you didn't. She goes, I haven't even shared them with you. How can you say I haven't? I said, because if you could do them in 3 days, you didn't get it right. It's a lot harder to do than just write down, 6 things. And so she was annoyed at me for, being so direct, right? And dismissive. 6 months later, she said, now I understand what you were saying. And you were right, I didn't have them. It did take me quite a while. I didn't realize how that would work. So I leave you with that thought, right? It's not easy to do, but don't start with how you're going to do something. Start with what needs to be done and why. Purpose, purpose, purpose. Outcome, outcome. Not how. Not how. How is a vehicle, not the means, not the endpoint, not the purpose.
Thank you, Joe. Another question came is, I would be interested learning agencies, what equipment do they have in the inventory in anticipation of requests for reasonable accommodation from the public that we serve, such as Braille printers, agendas, meeting materials, screen readers, software document. Is there a resource that this particular individual can go to learn more about that?
Well, I'll go back to my earlier comment about that accommodations are individualized, and your question is very broad, and what it might be answered at DOR and what it might be answered at the Department of Civil Rights is very different. So my best suggestion to you, if you're looking to know what a particular organization has, engage either through their public affairs office or through their civil rights section/unit, whatever it may be in the department. That's probably your best bet in terms of saying, what do you have available today?
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Joe? Joe's been very gracious with his time, and he's looking forward to his retirement after this meeting for sure. So if you don't have any other questions for Joe, I'm going to say goodbye, and with gratitude. And again, I wish you, Joe, the best of retirement life that you could possibly have. And we will continue to be in touch, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Bobby. Happy holidays to all of you. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you. Bye-bye.